Hey y'all, welcome to the fourth episode of our Fundamentals course. And in this lesson, we're going to cover the playlist. So if you're ready, let's jump right in. We're going to start by opening our project, Miriam First Beat. And as always, you don't need to make music along with me in this tutorial to understand the concepts, but it definitely helps you to solidify what you're learning. Anyway, let's exit out of any windows that we might have open and get the playlist up and running by using our Control or Function plus F5 shortcut. Again, that's Control on a PC and Function on a Mac. First, let's revisit the concept of patterns in FL Studio. Remember, the channel rack holds instruments and samples that are used to make a pattern, and we then put those patterns into songs to be used once or several times. We made a pattern over the previous two lessons, and you can see it here on the left-hand side of our playlist. This means that all of the music that we've made so far, again, both piano and drums, is contained here in this pattern. It's best to make patterns for specific parts of the song rather than all of the instruments being jammed into one place. So let's separate the piano from the drums. First, we want to make sure that our pattern picker, right here, is set to pattern 1. Then, let's open up the channel rack with our F6 shortcut and copy over our data that's held within our FL keys. We can copy, to explain that, by right-clicking on the instrument or sample and then selecting copy, or pressing C on our keyboard. Now, let's go back to the pattern picker, left-click, and drag upwards until we see pattern 2. If you notice, the channel rack is blank now, and that's because we just made a new pattern and all of our previous note data is still contained in pattern 1. Let's right-click on the FL Keys instrument and select Paste to put the note data that we copied into this new pattern. Let's navigate back to our first pattern by scrolling through the pattern picker and delete this data from our FL Keys instance in pattern 1. We can do this quickly by right-clicking and selecting Cut, and then just never pasting that data back again anywhere. It's an easy way, a bit unconventional, but it works. It's important to keep in mind that while this instance of FL Keys has no note data, and our other instance of FL Keys in pattern number 2 does have note data, that doesn't mean that those note data are shared. However, what is shared across patterns in the channel rack is what we do to those actual samples themselves. So, for instance, you can see that all of these instruments on pattern 2 are still muted after we muted them earlier in pattern 1. If we unmute one in pattern 1, it's also unmuted in pattern 2. This is important to keep in mind because muting or unmuting instruments does this across every pattern. Let's unmute all of our different channels here and then head back over to the playlist. By left-clicking and dragging on a pattern, we can drop it right into the playlist. Now, let's do this for both pattern 1 and pattern 2, but be sure to put them in different tracks. We want to put them in different tracks because down the road some of these tracks might hold instruments or audio clips that will be sent directly to the mixer, and we want to make sure that every pattern, instrument, or recorded audio clip has its own insert for easier editing. It also just helps us in staying organized by keeping things separate so that we can manipulate them and move them as we'd like. As you can see, we've put pattern 1 into track 1 and pattern 2 into track 2. There's a lot of dead space in pattern 1, so let's fix this by just dragging this pattern back to be only the note data that we want to look at. Further, let's take pattern 2 and left-click and drag it over to the second bar of our song. Again, this horizontal axis represents time, so when we play our song, first we'll hear the drum data, and then we'll hear the piano data. Navigating the playlist and piano roll well are two secrets of creating music quickly. Along the top of this playlist, there are similar tools to what we would find in the piano roll. Again, the draw tool is the jack of all trades in the playlist, just like it was in the piano roll, as it allows you to delete, slice, select, and move items so long as you use the appropriate shortcuts. If you're still a little hazy on exactly what those shortcuts are, you can review our last lesson or look at Miriam's beginner's shortcut list that's in our 6th lesson. That being said, occasionally you may want to access these tools rather than using their likeness from within the draw tool. Accessing them is actually a lot easier than clicking these buttons up here. We can use shortcuts on our keyboard instead. So long as we don't have our typing keyboard to piano keyboard functionality turned on, our physical keyboard is our best bet at getting to our tools quickly. To list off some of these tools and their shortcuts, we can press P to access the draw tool, B to access the paint tool, D to access the delete tool, T to access the mute tool, S to access the slip tool, C to access the slice tool, E to access the Select tool, Z to access the Zoom tool, and Y to access the Playback tool. Of those shortcuts that I just listed, far and away the most important are the Draw and Paint tools, which can be accessed by clicking either P or B. It's important to keep in mind that this shortcut functionality is actually also supported within the piano roll. So if you use those shortcuts there, they'll have the same effect on the tool that you've selected. An important note about the Playlist Slice tool is that if you slice a clip, like I'm doing here, and then you drag out the part of the clip that was sliced, it will refill with its original data. This distinction is actually really important because slicing a clip in the playlist doesn't actually mean that you're changing the clip itself. You're just determining what part of the clip plays at that point in the song. Later on in this course, we'll review chopping and cutting, which change the actual content of a clip rather than just determining what part is played. Moving beyond these tools, let's dive into navigating the playlist window itself. To vertically zoom, let's make sure that we're using the Draw tool and hold down Alt and scroll. This lets us see more tracks or a greater level of detail. If we want to horizontally zoom, on a PC we hold down Control, on a Mac Command, and we zoom again. This is going to help us get closer in or further out from an individual track, again to see a greater level of detail. Seeing as we're working within the playlist, we're going to want to exit out of pattern mode here and move into song mode. This reveals our playhead within the playlist. This little green triangle determines where our playing begins within the playlist. So you can move it by either dragging it to the right or left, or clicking to a specific point at which you want the playhead to start playing. However, let's say that we actually wanted to play just a specific part of the song over and over and over again. Maybe we might want to do this because we're editing, or we just want to really get a feel for how that part of the song sounds so that we can move forward. We can do this by highlighting within the time bar. Let's hold down Control on a PC or Command on a Mac and left click and drag to highlight a specific part of the song that we want to play. Now, when we hit play, we can see that the playhead stops and starts only within this little highlighted area. To get rid of our highlighted area, we can use the same shortcut that we had to make it, which is holding Control or Command, and we can just left click anywhere in the time bar. Now, when we're working within the playlist, each of these clips is editable as well. To select a clip and act on it, let's be sure that we left click here in the top left corner, because right clicking, as we would in most other programs, would delete the clip. Here, we have different things that we can do, which we'll explain in greater depth in later lessons, but for now, just make sure that if you're trying to edit it, you click in the top left. When interacting with the playlist, the play button within FL Studio's main window starts playing the playlist. The pause button, which replaces the play button, will pause where you are in the playlist, and the stop button will bring the playhead back to its original position. It's also important to note once again that when working the playlist, we have to be in song mode as opposed to pattern mode. Finally, the playlist allows for time markers to designate sections of the song for better organization and clarity as our project becomes more crowded, and ours will by the end of this entire fundamentals course. These can be inserted by going to the playlists menu here in the top left, selecting time markers, and selecting add one. Let's name ours piano. Now our time marker is held right here, and if we left click and drag, we can move it to signify where in the time of the playlist a different section begins. This next part of the lesson is one of the greatest value adds that we have given so far in our fundamentals course. We're going to go over how a sound flows from the channel rack to the playlist, because understanding this is key to developing music. So, we're going to look at the past 3 lessons at a higher level. While pattern clips can be put into tracks, we can go to the channel rack and take a peek at these, the sound themselves does not come out of the tracks. It comes out of the individual channels here within the channel rack. So if an instrument is muted in the channel rack, even if it's supposed to play in the playlist, it won't. Again, the sounds, in this case for patterns, come out of the channel rack. What's more, different patterns can have different instruments playing. The channel rack for each pattern still includes every instrument that exists within the channel rack. So for example here, in our second pattern, we can see the kick, clap, hat, and snare, but they're not playing. If we were to delete one of them on this second pattern, it wouldn't just delete the instrument from the second pattern. It would delete it from the entire channel rack, along with any note data that it has within any pattern. It's best to imagine the channel rack as a stage where a band is performing a concert. Just because the drummer isn't playing anything during one part of a song doesn't mean that the drummer's muted. It also doesn't mean that we can kick the drummer off the stage, because if we do, then she can't be unmuted or brought back to the stage later in the song. As a result, we have to think of patterns as very specific groupings of sounds that will be played together, with their noises stemming from inside the channel rack. Another incredibly helpful tip is that patterns can be separated into various new patterns that are each populated by a single instrument, although it does destroy the original pattern. So to do this, what we would do is we would select a pattern. So here we're going to select pattern 1. We're going to go up to the pattern picker, we're going to right click it, and we're going to select split by channel. Now, we have each of our individual instruments from within the pattern inside of their own pattern, split into new components. This can be extremely helpful when we're arranging songs, but sometimes it's a little cumbersome if you're not yet satisfied with your beat. So I would only recommend doing this if you like the pattern as it is. Well, that wraps up today's lesson on the playlist. Make sure that you save the project, and I'm looking forward to seeing y'all in the next one. This is Mirror Music, signing off.